The learning objectives of the Unit 1 is building a concept map or mind map of the course Multiple Facets of Culture in Second Language Education. A concept map or a mind map is a visual representation of the flow between ideas and their relationship. The concept map clarifies the core idea of our course and therefore the structure of the course. It helps us identify where we are situated with regard to the content of the course. Therefore, building a concept map at the beginning of the course and keep it in mind until its end is an essential element of learner autonomy. The core idea of the course, as we remember it from the introductory unit, are based on two statements. The first statement is that there are many ways to understand culture in second language classrooms. The concept of culture evolves in connection with changes in the social fabric and our reflection on ourselves as humankind and society. That suggests that for the concept map of the course, we should adopt a timeline-based model. And while speaking about the evolution of the concept of culture, we should consider social factors and factors of intellectual history that influenced this evolution. The second statement is that in second language education, we have been observing a transition from an object-oriented to a subject-oriented model of culture in the second language classroom. And this transition is connected with the emergence of a new trend toward a culturally responsive second language teaching, besides the traditional trend of teaching culture in second language classroom by topics and facts. This second statement suggests that we must identify specific features and examples of object and subject-oriented understandings of culture. Also, we should put on the timeline stages of this transition from object to subject oriented teaching, when and how it occurs. Also, it is essential to understand the relationship between different conceptions of culture and the most known second language teaching methods. And finally, it is important to know what terminology and typologies have been used in second language education to distinguish different facets of culture in second language classroom and how this terminology has evolved in response to the transition between an object toward a subject-oriented model of culture. In part 1 of the lecture, we will explore the terminology and typologies. In part 2, we will take a closer look at the essential stages of the evolution of the concept of culture in connection with social factors and second language teaching methods. Terminology and typologies. How the transition from an object-oriented to a subject-oriented model is reflected in the typologies and terminology used in second language education to acknowledge and categorize different aspects of culture in second language classroom. Christian Purin, a French specialist in teaching Spanish, introduced the distinction between object-oriented and subject-oriented approaches to describe the evolution of the language-culture relationship in second language education over the last 2 centuries. The opposition between culture as object and culture as subject reflects the position taken in respect to the learner. In the second language classroom, the object of learning is what we teach and what the learner learns. And the subject of learning is the learner herself or himself. The object-oriented model presents the target culture as a collection of information. We call this kind of knowledge declarative knowledge, opposed to performance or procedural skills. It may include various culture-related information such as history, geography, literature, national achievements, political system, traditions, dresses, customs, festivities, habits, and values shared by the societies speaking the target language. According to this model, the second language learner acquires declarative knowledge about the target culture besides learning the target language. The teacher's role is to present and explain different cultural facts and assist learners in gaining knowledge about the culture. We will call this process teaching culture or teaching culture by topics in the second language classroom. The subject-oriented model is oriented toward the learner and their values. This model presents culture as a manifestation of values behind culture-related facts and considers learners' cultural values and identities too. According to this model, through contact with values underlying the target culture, the individual values of the second language learner become the subject of transformation. The learner not only acquires knowledge about the target culture, but also develops procedural skills to perform, communicate in the target culture correctly. The teacher's role is to assist in the development of these procedural skills and the value transformation process in learners. Our goal is to form culturally aware citizens ready for intercultural interaction in the ever-changing multicultural world. We will call this approach culturally responsive second language teaching. The object-oriented model focusing on teaching culture by topics includes many different aspects. To distinguish these aspects, scholars have suggested different conceptual tools. The most popular traditional typology is culture with a capital C, big C culture, opposed to culture with a small c culture. Big C culture or achievement culture refers to achievements or the most notable products of a civilization. Literary works, art, music, history, geography, institutions, etc. Small C culture refers to people's everyday life, cultural practices, behaviors, customs, and beliefs. Today, it is difficult to say who was the first to introduce this typology. However, we can find references to big C, small c culture model in the methodological literature and different proficiency guidelines, that is, official documents that define proficiency standards, criteria for assessment, and strategies for effective teaching. For example, let's see how the American Association of Teachers of French used this typology in 1996 to define criteria for teaching culture. The document stresses that both categories of culture must be evaluated. I quote, "The assessment of knowledge, cognitive skills, should include aspects of life, small c, and civilization, large c, but these should be evaluated as distinct features." Moreover, the elements belonging to big C and small c cultures are unequal. The typology involves a hierarchical relationship between big C culture and small c culture. It is based on the idea of a progression from everyday life, small c culture, which is seen as simple in content, to literature and other artistic achievements, big C culture, which is seen as complex or polysemantic in content. Professor Karen Rieseger, Danish specialist in cultural second language pedagogy, illustrates this hierarchy with Brötchenkunde-Gretchenkunde model. This model has been very popular in teaching German as a foreign language in Denmark. The chart shows that the cultural element referring to history, geography, and everyday life, which make up Brötchenkunde, are suggested to be taught to beginners. More advanced students should focus on literature and other artistic achievements, which make up Gretchenkunde. Within this model, the goal of studying German is to understand artistic achievements of German nation and, above all, works of literature. The hierarchical typology, big C, small c culture, is still influential in second language education. Today, many second language curricula have been built with this model in mind, and many second language teachers think about culture in this way. However, since the late 1970s, we can observe persistent attempts to review the big C, small c culture model and suggest alternative typologies. Let's take a closer look at some examples of this alternative approach. In his seminal chapter Toward a Cultural Competence, Hector Hammerly, an American and Canadian researcher in second language education, suggested in 1986 a three-folded typology of culture in the second language classroom. This typology comprises informational or factual culture, achievement or accomplishment culture, and behavioral culture. Informational or factual culture refers to the cultural facts that the average educated native speaker knows about his society, the geography and history of his country, its heroes and villains, and so on. Achievement or accomplishment culture refers to the artistic and literary accomplishment of a society, accomplishments in letters, arts, and music. And behavioral culture refers to the sum of everyday life. If we compare Hammerly's typology to the big C, small c culture model, it may seem that Hammerly has not added anything new. He just distinguished two subcategories within the big C culture, facts and artistic achievements, and replaced the term small c culture by behavioral culture. But if we take a closer look at how the author describes the behavioral culture, we realize that his typology demonstrates a new turn in understanding culture. Let's read this definition. The emphasis in second language programs should be on behavioral culture, especially conversation formula and kinesics. Is the form of culture most important to successful communication. Understanding patterns of behavior, actual behavior plus attitudes, values, etc., is not only essential to communication, but very necessary to an understanding of literature and other forms of achievement culture. Note also that it is not enough to acquire a cognitive knowledge of behavioral culture. The learner should develop a performance knowledge of its behavior patterns. We can notice here at least four innovative statements. First, behavioral culture is divided into behavior patterns and values behind them. Behavior is a manifestation of values, beliefs, and representations. So, behavioral culture is not a knowledge of fact about people's everyday life, behaviors, and customs. It is instead an understanding of why people behave in this way. Second, behavioral culture also is manifest through language, including everyday conversation patterns and nonverbal language. For example, the language patterns expressing politeness. So, culture is embedded into language and therefore becomes an essential part of communication competence, besides knowledge of grammar and vocabulary. Third, the knowledge of behavioral culture is performance knowledge, or in other words, procedural skills. Learners must be able to behave appropriately while communicating in second language. Just as it's not enough to know explicit grammar rules to speak a language fluently, it is not enough to have declarative, explicit knowledge about customs, values, and behaviors. It is necessary to develop some skills in culturally appropriate behavior. The learner must perform the cultural values to communicate appropriately in the target language. It is impossible to perform values without accepting them and make of them our own values, at least partially. And that involves a transformation of values in the learner. Through understanding the values of others, the learner reflects on their own cultural values and identity. And finally, Hammerly's typology emphasizes the values, the core part of the behavioral culture, as essential to understanding other facets of culture, such as achievements. Cultural values have been brought to the forefront. That is why Hammerly argues that the second language class should be focused on behavioral culture. Also, Hammerly model includes some object-oriented aspect of culture too. It emphasizes the transformational process in the learner and demonstrates the turn toward the subject-oriented understanding of culture, focused on the learner. In the 1980s and 90s, all typology of culture in second language classroom, like Hammerly's typology, try to review the big C, small c model, traditionally focused on the big C achievements. First, they switch attention from big C culture to small c culture. And second, they broaden and elaborate the concept of the small c culture to emphasize culturally influenced beliefs and perceptions, values, especially expressed through language but also through behaviors. Let's see some more notable examples of this trend. In 1985, Gail Robinson, an American researcher in the area of cross-cultural education, published the results of a study aiming to explore teachers' understanding of culture in second language classrooms. She reports that when second language teachers are asked what does culture mean to you, the most common responses fall into three interrelated categories: product, behavior, and ideas. Raised on these categories, Tomalin and Stemplansky suggested another threefold typology of culture. This typology comprises product culture, or achievement culture, or big C culture, which refers to artistic achievements, literature, folklore, art, music, and architecture. Behavior culture, which refers to customs, habits, dress, foods, and leisure, and ideas, referring to beliefs, values, and institutions. Like Hammerly's typology, the section corresponding to the small c has been brought to the forefront. Tamalin and Stemplansky went further and explicitly divided the small c culture into behaviors and ideas. Also, like Hammerly, Tamalin and Stemplansky argues that the second language lesson should be focused on behaviors, patterns, and ideas behind them. They call this combination culturally influenced behavior. Like in Hammerly, Tamalin and Stemplansky's argumentation is also based on the idea that values, which are expressed through language and behavior, are essential for communication in the target language. Thus, culturally influenced behavior patterns, and ideas behind them is essential for developing cultural awareness or cross-cultural awareness. That is, sensitivities to the impact of culturally induced behavior on language and communication. Cultural or cross-cultural awareness defines, in turn, the cross-cultural communication skills, a part of communication competence. Cultural awareness includes three dimensions. Only the first of them refers to the understanding of the culturally induced behavior of others. Two other dimensions refer to learners' reflection on their own cultural behaviors and values. Like Hammerly model, Tamalin and Stemplansky's model switches the focus from culture as object to culture as subject. In other words, from teaching culture by topics to assisting in developing learners' cultural identity through contact with the cultural values of others. In 1996, a very similar three-folded typology, product, practices, and perspectives, so-called three-piece model, has been introduced by the American Council for Teachers of Foreign Languages, ACTFL, the organization which set industry standards and established proficiency guidelines in second language education in the United States. Cultural products refer to a collection of facts and achievements. The product of culture are both tangible and intangible. Cultural practices comprise the patterns of behavior and social interaction accepted by society. Practices involve the use of products. They represent the knowledge of what to do, when and where, and how to interact within a particular culture. Cultural perspectives include the meanings, attitudes, values, beliefs, and ideas that underlie cultural practices and product. The ACTFL replaced the term ideas we can find in Tamalin and Stemplansky model by perspectives and broadened the notion of product. The latter includes not only elements of achievement culture focused on artistic works like in Tamalin and Stemplansky model, but also cultural facts like in Hammerly model. Today, the 3PEs model underlies the national standards in foreign language education in the United States. You can also find very often references to this model in the literature on second language education written in English. Over the last 20 years, we have been observing some attempts to modify the famous three-piece model to emphasize further the role of perspectives, values, and therefore the role of the learner. For instance, Yang Fang Tang suggests combining products and practices under the name of manifestations. According to Tang, we can consider both cultural products and practice, facts, achievements, behaviors as different kinds of manifestation of cultural mind functions, such as meanings, attitudes, values, beliefs, and ideas. Mind functions control and determine cultural manifestations and provide the key to correctly understanding their meanings. According to Tang, the simplified 2M's typology can help second language teacher to focus on the essential, which is helping learners to understand meanings and values behind cultural manifestations. Whatever these manifestations are, a piece of art, a novel, a custom, a language pattern expressing politeness, or a facial expression. This is the relationship between cultural manifestations and underlying mind functions that must be taught in the second language classroom. In his turn, Patrick Moran suggests an additional dimension to the three-piece model: communities, defined as ways of relating to others, from interpersonal relationships to national bonds. To Moran, second language learners develop their cultural knowledge and awareness through cultural experience, a personal encounter with another way of life. Cultural experience occurs in a specific social context within a specific social community. Thus, cultural experience involves, among others, teacher-student relationship in the second language classroom. Encountering other ways of life makes gain different kinds of cultural knowledge and skills. Only one of them refers to cultural information presented as object, knowing about. Others are related to subject, the learner. The learner is expected to understand beliefs and values that make up cultural perspectives behind products and practices, knowing why. But also, the learner is expected to develop skills in engaging in appropriate cultural practices, knowing how, and reflect on their own values, knowing oneself. The fourth dimension, communities, which Moran adds to the three-piece model, emphasizes the importance of both social context of cultural experience and the personal involvement of learners in transformative intercultural interactions. If we put together all typologies we explored in this lecture, we can see that the evolution of conceptual tools used in second language education to acknowledge and categorize different facets of culture reflects the transition from object to subject-oriented model of culture in the second language classroom. The early big C, small c culture typology was object-oriented and hierarchical. It was focused on big C, mainly represented by artistic achievements such as literature, as we saw in Brötchenkunde, Gretchenkunde model. The new conceptual frameworks emphasize the importance of the meaning system of culture. For that, they use different terms such as values, ideas, perspectives, and mind functions. The concept of behavioral culture was raised from the concept of small c culture and gradually evolved into perspective or ideas associated with practices, behavior patterns, and verbal and nonverbal languages. Behavioral culture and later practices and perspectives have replaced the big C focused on achievement culture as the instruction center. The new typologies highlight the role of values and beliefs in shaping cultural products and fostering cultural practices. Rather than focusing on cultural products and practices viewed as an object of learning, the attention is given to the learner's cultural experience, which involves the transformation of learners' values, beliefs, and attitudes through encountering and reflection on values of others. In the second part of the Unit 1, We will explore the evolution of the concept of culture in connection with social factors and second language teaching methods.